Hello and welcome to the Telegraph Studios. I'm Rachel Downey and today we're going to discuss how auto-enrolment is going to affect companies. I'm going to be joined by Vanda Cox from Boardstone. Hello Vanda.
Hello.
First of all, what is auto-enrolment all about?
Well, it's a really important piece of legislation that the government has brought in, which means that every UK employer has to have a workplace pension scheme into which they auto-enrol eligible employees. And it's really important that they take this legislation seriously and prepare for it well in advance and get it right.
Now, a lot of companies are going to think of this as an administrative burden. What are the most common pitfalls that companies should be aware of?
The main thing that employers need to be aware of is that the data drives the success or failure of the project, so staff data. So an employer needs to be able to gather comprehensive staff data accurately and quickly. And if the company can do that, it will make the auto-enrolment project much easier.
You mentioned staff data.
Yes.
Data about what?
So this is gathering data that's probably held in the HR records, dates of birth, home addresses and so on, and payroll data, basic salary details, total earnings, etc.
So we've got our data all sorted. What else should I be aware of? Any other pitfalls?
It's important for companies to understand what the costs are and the options and plan in advance, because the longer the time frame, the more options companies will have.
Now you mentioned time there, but you know, we're all busy. What happens if we miss a deadline?
Well, don't miss the deadline, because there are fines and the pensions regulator will issue fixed penalty notices and potentially compliance notices. So really, it's really important to get it right. And there's no excuse really, because the pensions regulator does let employers know when their staging date is well in advance and keeps sending reminders. But if companies do miss the deadline, they really need to engage very quickly with an advisor who will handhold them through the process very quickly and negotiate with the regulator and agree a time frame by which the company will be compliant.
How do I extract value for the money that I've spent on this?
There are two ways of going about auto-enrolment. One is if the employer just decides to make it something that they have to do to comply with the legislation, pay in the minimum contribution and don't bother to communicate it very effectively to staff, in which case they really won't get very much value for the money that they're spending. The alternative is to embrace pensions and decide that it's going to be a core part of the employee benefits package, and that it's going to be communicated well and with the aim of educating the employees and making sure that they really appreciate and understand the value of the benefit. And in order to do that, ideally, employers should pay in more than the minimum contributions.
So I've communicated with all my staff. How does this help the employers?
Well, a good pension can help an employer to recruit high calibre staff. It helps reduce staff turnover if it's properly communicated and staff are engaged, and potentially motivate staff as well if they feel that they're cared for by their employer, particularly where staff turnover is low and employees do stay for the longer term.
Now, I think a lot of companies are going to say, you know, we don't need a third-party advisor, we've got an HR guy, they can look online. What do you think to that?
I think we're getting into the realms now of smaller companies starting the auto-enrolment process. So many of those don't have an HR person in the first place. And even where they do, it's quite a burden to put on their shoulders, because you know, there's the pension angle. They need to find a suitable pension provider. They have no pension expertise or knowledge particularly. Looking online for many employers just leads to confusion, because there is so much information there. But I think probably the most important thing is that someone coming at it with just the facts wouldn't necessarily understand the process and the order of the process and the need to make the decisions in a particular order in order to make it an effective, simple journey. The worst thing is making the decisions in the wrong order, starting down one particular track and then having to unravel that later.
Now, you mentioned the amount of questions that are online, how ever changing, ever evolving it is. So what would you say are the most important questions when looking for extra support?
When choosing an advisor, an employee needs to be really sure that they understand the type of advice and assistance, if that's what they need. There's quite a wide range of solutions and advisors out there and different propositions. So if the employer really does want to outsource the whole thing, obtain very clear advice and have someone manage the process from start to finish, then they need to be sure that that's what they're going to get, and they need to ask the right questions and compare very carefully the offerings of different advisors. They're at risk potentially of being just given a guide telling them this is step-by-step process what you need to do, here it is, now go and do it. But I think most employers, the smaller end of the market, will want to be handheld through the process.
With that all in mind, and moving forward with it, do I need to treat all my staff the same?
Well, there's a minimum level of contributions that need to be paid under auto-enrolment, and treating the employees appropriately within the categories that they've been designated under the auto-enrolment legislation, then there's absolutely no reason why an employer shouldn't pay higher contributions to key staff or senior staff or particular groups of employees, perhaps those that tend to stay with the business longer term.
How does this all apply to you?
We would handhold you through the process from start to finish. The starting point would be to give you visibility on the costs, the options, and help you to form a very clear strategy. Then we would put in a project plan, appoint a project manager who would be the dedicated project manager to handhold you through it, and who would book regular meetings or calls to make sure that at each stage you're on track where you need to be and have done all the key things that need to have been done at those key points, and that you're ready for your staging date.
Now, is this the same process with SMEs and also the bigger companies as
It
well?
is the same process, yes. It tends to be slightly less complex for the smaller companies because they often don't have existing pensions in place that need to be replaced or unravelled or tweaked in any way. So sometimes that can be easier, starting with a clean sheet of paper. And the process tends to be slightly shorter. It doesn't necessarily take as long. Often as well, there are fewer contractual issues that need to be resolved at the outset. So it generally is simpler, but it is still broadly the same process.
So why Boardstone?
Well, we're independent. We've got vast amounts of experience on auto-enrolment already. We've done it lots of times. We've got our own auto-enrolment administration tool for companies that haven't got that through their payroll solution, and we have a very clear process and can handhold companies through it from start to finish to a successful conclusion.
Well, look, Vanda Cox, thank you for joining us here today.
My pleasure.